What is with that fit, Hugo? You look fantastic.
The drift is real.
Fantastic. I look like the fucking Romanian flag. For those in audio, I literally am wearing a.
I immediately hid my wallet.
Oh, motherfucker.
Starting with the race science early.
Absolutely. No,
First minute.
Romanians are absolutely honorary Slavs. There is absolutely no conversation about that. But there are some certain oddities that we kind of, look at them from the side. Like the capital of Romania, my girlfriend visited recently, and she gave a very astute depiction of what it's like, because I haven't been. She said it's like every Slavic Balkan city, but just 3 times bigger. Like literally every building is thicker and bigger. Probably reproductive organs of Romanians are as well, but you never know. I always wondered if there's ultra-nationalist Romanians that think that they are the actual leftovers of the Roman Empire. That would be very interesting conversation to have.
You'd think, even with these stupid ideas, if this shit happened over 2,000 years ago, you've been mixing in I know a couple of Romanians, and I think every single one of them has at least some Russian admixture at some point, right? Or Slavic at the very least. So what are you getting? And also, are you going to really go down the route of, these fucking Slavic orcs who look exactly like me versus I'm Aryan super race?
I don't think the Romanians have any of that weird semi-racism shit. And it's very strange. For example, Hungarians, I also think that they don't really engage in race science with the Slavs the way Western Europeans do, with generalizing us as eternal construction workers who are de facto barbarian. But Hungarians are interesting in them, pretty much being arguably one of the least white motherfuckers if you, look at the definition of what is white from a racist perspective in Europe, and yet being ridiculously racist towards motherfuckers that look like Hakim, for example, or that come in from Asia, which has always been absolutely beautiful, like non-whites infighting over who gets to be approved of by daddy German and daddy white American is the cope is absolutely surreal.
How about you, JT? Any race science developments that you have to contribute?
Oh, what do I have? I feel like I had something. Oh, I went to so we're new in the neighborhood, right? And this was a couple nights ago now. There's a nice old couple across the street. And the guy, he walks over.
They saw JT and they're like, no colored.
Yeah.
They saw JT and they were like, me and my boyfriend saw you across the bar and you were very cute.
We liked your vibe. Yeah.
They saw the curly hair and they were like, when did they start allowing Italians here? Sorry, I keep going.
So this is a real nice older couple, probably, I don't know, mid-70s. And they came across the street because we were playing with Evie out front. They're like, hey, we every few months we like to have about 5 houses down that way and 5 houses down that way all come over to have snacks and drinks and stuff. You guys should come. And so we got my sister to babysit Evie, and we go over that night. Really nice people, but apparently we missed the memo for the dress code, because a good third of the people there, and there were 25 people there, were wearing shirts with a big Trump on it that just said, "You missed, bitch." I'm like, oh man, here we go. So there, yeah. So, and I should have known. I mean, this neighborhood is the Trumpiest place I've ever seen in my life. I was shocked when we came here, because when we came in and toured before we moved here,
you're hiding in plain sight.
yeah, they'll never find me here. It was a normal neighborhood. But then when we moved in, there were flags. It was like Trump was coming to town or something. Every house had a Trump flag flying from it, like that, and an American flag. Man, this is So yeah, I'm expecting to have some nice race science updates for you boys periodically. So stay tuned.
The Caucasoid brain.
People? Absolutely. As I asked, are there any ethnic people in the neighborhood?
There are. Yes. And I'm trying to think if any of them were flying the Trump flag. I don't.
Because honestly, that's what I was going to say. I was like, JT was looking for where to buy a house, and he saw absolutely nobody except a fucking KKK looking ass motherfuckers in the neighborhood. And he was like, this is not strange. Let me purchase a house in this cul-de-sac.
Yeah. Surely this is a normal place to live. No, there are. It's just it's the area.
I bet they're so confused. They're like, we heard that this filthy race mixer's coming with a Zimbabwean wife, and then afterwards, like,
Yeah.
there's this white.
Where is he?
And he has a white woman as the help. Hey, man, you should go around with Evie, and she's like lily white, mashallah alayha.
Yeah.
Absolutely adorable, very like typical white kid. And then you should tell everybody, oh, my wife is Zimbabwean, but you have this kid that is
Very clearly white. Yeah.
His alien genes are so superior. It has dominated
God.
the child. Very хорошо.
She's very blonde. She's very blonde. I tell you what.
My God. And the old couple across the world was like, the cum is strong with this one.
Completely washed away the impurities.
Would you like to breed my wife as well? The children keep coming out a bit brown.
Oh my God.
JT,
Deprogram
No,
dual
no.
services.
yeah,
He's like-
JT's gonna do this.
Dude, like, I have like 6 kids with my wife now, and they're all coming out black. I don't know what the fuck is going on. Like, can you please breed my wife this time?
Exactly right.
I made very yeah. You can write a movie about what I
Resident
just
bull.
said.
The Trump neighborhood bull. And then they see the hammer and sickle tattoo on your ass cheek.
What have I done?
But do you have like
Your kids will come out non-binary.
do you have like communist memorabilia in your living room? Because I'm kind of like edging towards telling you to maybe move it in case sometimes you show
Yeah.
up for some beer or coffee.
No, I don't have any, like, I don't
just
have
say
my
it's a
Lenin bust
souvenir.
yet. I'm going to bring it home from when I go to Texas tomorrow. But
Just say it's a souvenir, man. It's all right. Nobody will
yeah,
fuck
but the
it.
problem is the books on the bookshelf. It's like, Dune, Red Rising, The Expanse, communism on the entire side. Yeah.
These
Look,
guys are so
hang-
dumb, they
hang-
don't know what it is, dude. They will see
Yeah.
Das Kapital and they will like, oh my God, he's a great businessman. He probably reads books on how to generate
Have you-
more capital.
Yeah, that's not what they're gonna be like. Das Kapital, and it's like, why he's reading geography in German? That's what they're gonna fucking think. Oh my God, my favorite Belgian city, Paris.
Why is there a whole book about capital letters?
Yeah. Where's Das lowercase?
Fucking stupid. Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Deprogram. Today we have a lovely episode for you. It is about, the collapse of the neoliberal order is what we're trying to uncover. I have a beautiful intro that I've prepared for you boys. Too verbose for my taste, but I had to write this like 5 minutes before we started because I completely forgot.
In
that I
typical
didn't write an
fashion.
intro-
Yeah.
that I didn't write an intro. All right, excuse me. The inherent corruption of the rules-based order, present since its forceful inception and imposition on the rest of the world, is only matched by its gradual erosion at emerging forces it can't contend with, no matter how hard the ruling class interests it serves try. This erosion has now turned into an avalanche of multipolarity, the first correct step of this century towards a more productive and positive future. To piss off the mouse, a single spark can start a prairie fire, and this spark has begun burning at the dead rot of the U.S. hegemonic system. I was going to go way more ridiculous with it and go like revolutionary sloganeering, but I thought that might annoy our lovely mouse way too much, so I'm going to avoid it.
That was
for now.
good.
But it is my favorite pastime. I always make this joke or like this cringe fact about myself, and I'll continue to do it. When I was very first like began reading to Marxism, as typical, I became very attracted to the Maoist writings and the tertiary Maoist writings specifically. And one of my favorite things about them was the way that they were write, the way it would be translated into English, because of course I can't read the Mandarin, but how bombastic it was. And I was like, you know what, it would be super chill to figure out how to do this, how to write like this. So I would like sit
No,
there
it
trying
wouldn't.
to...
It would be so fucking weird. It would be so weird. Fun.
Hey, well, that's what I
Yeah,
did.
yeah.
And that was an exercise in improving my English, trying to write Chinese fucking translated Maoist revolutionary slogans. So there you go. Anyways, today we'll be covering 3 things. The first and foremost of which is the falsity and crumbling of sorts of the liberal or parliamentary democratic system, which has been force-fed down basically the entire world. We'll follow that with a covering of de-dollarization, how it's happening, why it's happening, what processes are going on, and then we'll close it off with a beautiful overview by GT of human rights. The most important of which, of course, the bedrock of all this nonsense used to... you had a bunch of people talk about the universal rights of man at the same time as they were enslaving people. So this is what we're going to get to. Of course, we can't do anything that we do without your tremendous support. We love all of you, so thank you to our Patreon supporters. We have many fantastic perks. You get bonus episodes, extra episodes, bonus content, access to the Discord with access to us, of course. Once monthly discussions in the Habib chats where we discuss anything and everything with full access to us and pictures of our hog. This is the biggest seller, of course.
Someone's gonna sign up and be like, "Where are they?"
Exactly.
They don't exist.
That's what she said. Oh, I'm in 2012. Oh.
Exactly right. Now you go, please enter into your beautiful rendition.
Absolutely, thank you. But before I start, I must say that, a month in and month out, I learned more and more about JT and Hakeem. And now I learned why this man is so eloquent with his English. Like, people like me started out in English by singing songs like head and shoulders, knees and toes, knees and toes. And he started out his, deep dive into English linguistics with a guy ranting about the labor aristocracy shall forever be inherently reactionary because etc. etc. So
this is the 37th form of liberalism.
Oh man.
So yeah, that's where the divide comes in. But speaking of a divide, let me start you off on the divide between how neoliberal democracy is presented to you, me, and everybody else, and what it is at its core. In a more, let's say, with the other gentleman, you will talk about more like empirical stuff and example based, etc., etc. I want to start off today's conversation with a more general overview and a little bit of deep dive into why none of this, as it is presented to you, makes much sense. So that maybe some of you who are not informed get to learn something, and for those who might be, maybe you'll get some additional mannerisms that you can use to better explain it to those in your surrounding which might not be as informed. So the first thing they basically hammer into your head at school is the incredible value the current electoral system presents us all as citizens. They throw Churchill-like quotes about this not being the perfect system, but it's better than all others. They instruct you to feel pride in the millions which have given their lives in the fight for voting rights over the centuries. They tell you to be grateful because, hey, it could be much worse. All of these classic modern pitches, not bitches, to those of us living in late-stage capitalist brain rot are to an extent correct, but they're ironically used to stifle ideas for improvement, not promote them. Talking about adapting the system to current conditions, talking about the expansion of which aspects of everyday social and economic life we get to govern by ourselves are turned into borderline social taboos. They speak to us about gratitude, but not so that we can have a well-rounded historical understanding of our past and the world, but instead so that we don't think about elevating this system to something better, like those very same millions who fought for voting rights have done in the past. The classic, they want you to praise someone like MLK, but they never want you to become someone like him. They remove ideology, they remove material conditions and fully naturalize the current status quo. How it is right now must remain so forever. To question it is to basically be ungrateful, even if your intention is to improve it. Most secular countries have managed to adapt this sort of eternal belief in the market and the so-called parliamentary democratic system into a bastardized religion, a rallying cry of their national and cultural identities. The classic, I vote, therefore I am. I would even add, therefore I am American, because that's where this ideology kind of really peaks. This blindingly oversimplified perspective has turned one of the most impressive governing systems into a stifling ideology, using rhetoric on the progressive idea of voter self-representation as a tool to limit what that very vote can do in the first place. Talking about voting rights in the workplace is seen as silly and utopian, the same way kings laughed at the idea of people's self-governance. Refusing to vote for candidates which commit war crimes abroad or start whole-ass wars is seen as simplistic and anti-intellectual, as if there's something profound in doing lesser evilisms with literal murderers. Calls for stabilizing the economy are listened to during the election cycle, but excused away by the ungoverned rule of the free market once the ballots are cast. All are split between those who vote and those who have a super PAC, where the latter define what you can even vote on in the first place. The impoverished and homeless are forgotten because they don't pose an electoral risk. Hard to vote when you're starving, Hard to be represented when you don't vote because you're starving. All of these various snakes eating their own ass, he said a thing, don't even cover the top of the top of the top of the hypocritical iceberg, which is neoliberal democracy. Just the first one I mentioned should be a conversation stopper, not even starter. How is it we're told we don't live under a authoritarian structure when 8 to 9 hours, 5 to 7 days a week, for 80% of our lives, we have no say in what is to be done with our time, our labor, and our souls? I don't know if anything is closer to the definition of half-assed than a system calling itself democratic while allowing you to barely direct 50% of your waking life. A system where the vast majority wants genocide and war to stop, yet it continues. Where a vast majority want an economy for the many, not the few, yet the wealth hoarding continues. A system where every single Homo sapien is calling for peace, yet the war rattle continues. You can only sit half-assed on the chair before you eventually fall off. And our chair, it's very, very wobbly.
Well said.
One thing that I would like to add a little bit to this generally is that when it comes to the idea of parliamentary representation, the concept that's sold is that you should have proportional representation, everybody will have their say through their representatives, but what more often happens, and this is very clearly evident concretely when we see European politics, which are their bread and butter is impotent parliamentarism, is just gridlocked governments. Yeah. You can't just keep mashing together completely opposing sides and expecting them to form any sort of coherent, especially when the current political, diplomatic, geopolitical, and economic situation forces people to not, be in this cringe, middle liberal, I'm not left, I'm not right, this nonsense, which usually, classical liberal nonsense, which you could get away with before when economic conditions were better. The mythology still stood high. But now it's, people are seeing that their quality of life is eroding. Climate change is a significant issue. The support to this and that impotent fucking struggle, whether it be what's going on in Ukraine or for whatever reason supporting the genocide in Israel, despite the fact that the vast majority of every population that's polled is against doing this. These people are seeing these things and then going one way or the other. They're like, I interpret these through a certain lens that's incorrect, and then they go far right, or they do the work and interpret it correctly, and then they go far left. Either way, because of this stratification and division, you will not be able to construct any sort of meaningful governments, and that is by design, because while everything is fucking gridlocked, business goes on as usual, and usually it is the deregulation that gets passed more easily than re-regulating or increasing whatever taxes and whatnot.
Sometimes even with literal interim governments, like to go super hyper specific. You have a few current countries in Europe that are a perfect example of that, where you either exist in two extremes. One hyper corrupt party that is usually represented by strong corporate bank interests, the Central European government by the European Union, etc., or after usually they went in, if we're talking about, for example, the so-called post-socialist world, they immediately went in so that they make sure that the communists don't come back into power once elections were allowed, which would have happened in literally 85% of all post-Soviet and post-socialist in general countries, etc., etc. And then they stay in power for like 20 fucking years. And then finally people are like, okay, we successfully voted them out with some sort of like generally united opposition, but by ideologies, not even ideologies, by worldviews that are completely opposed. And then what happens? They kick that guy out. They now take parliament, which is, for now, democracy is working really well, and then they start infighting amongst themselves. And then for 5-6 years, they can't even start a government. And the only point at which they can start a government is when they do what? They cooperate with the original very large corrupt party that was there, and then absolutely nothing changes. Wars, people that, as Hakeem beautifully put, that people might not want to support, that's not touched because you don't win a general election with actual ideological disagreements. You have to create the most vanilla, the most basic literal meme of nothing ever changes party for something for you to get 51% in a country which is struggling economically as we enter late stage capitalism, as again Hakeem said, and therefore will never basically unite under one particular banner through neoliberal democracy. And that is, again, 100%, what Hakeem said is extremely important, and we need to hammer it in your head. It is by design. It is 100% by design. And they make so much fucking money during these interim periods because business doesn't give a fuck. Business loves when the government is so fucking confused.
Gridlocked,
loves it, thrives on it. That's when, like, even in tiny countries, new billionaires are born. Those are like peak moments. But it just doesn't work, especially on points that are of extreme importance. And business goes on as usual.
And also, by the way, just by virtue, and just to re-emphasize this tired Marxist analysis, the reason that parliamentary democracy is such a staple of liberalism and the foundational rock of liberalism is the sacrosanctness of capital and protection of property rights. The reason that parliamentarism is put on top of this as a political structure is because no matter how popular, like, socialist policies and anti-capital, or not anti-capital in that way, but like anti-capitalist policies at the very least, no matter how popular they are, the ruling class will still be able to, through their ownership of the media, through buying up of political positions, either through like heavy lobbying or through basically heavy advertising to confuse the mass of people regarding this policy or that policy, etc. They can always maintain their in, and through that in, they can maintain and block laws that would be, for example, let's say, limiting in any way. And by the way, this is only within the liberal framework. If you want to go into the socialist framework and you would want to, for example, outlaw private property, I don't mean personal property, I mean, for example, private ownership of vast tracts of land, blah, blah. Not even all of it, but at least the very large holdings of land and many factories and lots of capital and all that shit, right? Even if you want to do that, in the vast majority of the time, this would require constitutional changes, which would require like a 60 or 70% vote through the parliament and approval of whatever fucking constitutional monarch they would have in some of these countries. It genuinely is a joke of a system. It's specifically made to lock you into accepting capitalism at most with the quote unquote human face. But moving on from this point, let's enter into the de-dollarization. De-dollarization, just as a concept, is a current ongoing global process of reducing the dominance of the US dollar in international trade, in finance, in reserve holdings, central bank reserve holdings, for example. Usually this is attempted by countries or institutions that want to diversify away from the dollar and in its place use other currencies for trade or holding reserves, for example, in gold or some other currency that's also popularly being used, or creating financial systems that do not rely on the dollar. Before we get into why this happens and what are the consequences of this, what is the historical thing here? Why is it that the dollar is so supreme over everything?
And should we change the Deprogram Patreon currency to another currency?
Exactly right. Yes.
Why are you not? You know so much about this. Tell us what. How does this impact me, specifically me?
If you exist in a system which is practically, if you're in North America, if you're in Europe, if you're in Japan or whatever, it's better for you to be already pegged kind of to the dollar, because everything else in your country is and around your country is being done by the dollar. But this will change soon. Not yet. We're going to get to this, but soon this will change. Anyways, the historical rise of dollar dominance begins with, became solidified after World War II with the Bretton Woods Agreement in 1944, which was towards the end of World War II, but the actual like paperwork and everything was passed and approved shortly after the war. This established the dollar as the primary global reserve currency in the West, pegged to gold. Why do I specify in the West? Because this system would then be imposed on all the rest of the world. The British and French and whatever else colonial empires would impose this like ad hoc dollar supremacy through their own colonial currencies on the colonial subjects. So even before independence, for many of these nations, they were already kind of like grandfathered in, if that's the right term, into being dependent on the dollar. But moving along from that, this allowed the U.S. to exert immense, like supreme financial and geopolitical influence. And then once the gold standard was abandoned in 1971, which I believe happened under Nixon, the petrodollar instead was introduced. And the idea is that oil transactions would be denominated and controlled through dollars. The sale and purchase would be through dollars, which reinforces the global hegemony of the US dollar, because oil was the primary driver for everything: industry, electricity generation, everything. Or the processes for developing extraction of coal and whatnot. To run the machines, you needed oil, so on and so forth. This basically allowed the United States to do several things. The first one of which is an annoying economics term that you need to learn, which is seigniorage. This enables the United States to specifically extract income for itself through seigniorage, which is profits generated from issuing currency. If you're the largest currency on the world and the currency that basically all the world is forced to use against their will even, then of course there's like a monopoly type of market relation. When you read in economics textbooks, when they use examples of like, the perfect competition, blah blah, perfect relations within a market economy, nothing in real life adheres to this like mythology, aside from oil markets and by extension the currency markets usually, because they're such strong monopolies. Regardless, that's number one. They get profits from issuing the main currency, and second of all, they can fund all sorts of deficits. The United States can fund all sorts of deficits by issuing debt themselves that other nations just kind of have to absorb, or they willingly absorb, because that's just the cost of doing business. They can also likewise lock out countries from international trade by reducing hard currency supply. They can reduce the total amount of dollars that goes to a particular country through sanctioning and through other trade maneuvers, which would then basically prevent that country from buying anything on the world market, because the entire world market only works in dollars. What the fuck are you going to do with a North Korean won, for example, right, to purchase things? I specify North Korean won because this is what the United States effectively did to the DPRK, to the point that the DPRK was forced to allegedly create the most sophisticated US dollar counterfeiting operation, to the point that it's very, very confusing, actually. The United States keeps accusing and then going back on their accusation, accusing and coming back on their accusation, because some of the doubtful dollars are so perfect and so you can't you can't tell them apart from the ones that are made actually in the US and put out by the Fed.
Wow.
so they're like, okay, maybe they're not. Maybe they just got dollars through another way. But it's the idea is that the DPRK is very, very good at making counterfeit dollars, which makes sense for their operations throughout the 90s and early 2000s. Anyways, because of all these points and some more that I'm going to touch on later, we had an emergence of a drive for de-dollarization initiatives. And this is de-dollarization in and of itself is a response to the structural dependency. The reason I say structural dependency is because within the system, within the world economic system, this is a structural component, the central role of the dollar, right? There is a structural dependency on the dollar. Countries that attempt to resist U.S. economic coercion, sanctions, for example, or manipulations of the finance or financial system that serve U.S. interests, they try to resist U.S. Maneuvers in such a way by de-dollarizing their economies and de-dollarizing relations with other countries as well, so that the trade can exclude the United States, will not involve their banking services. This is an attempt where peripheral and semi-peripheral nations break free by the imperial core imposed monetary constraints that have just kept them down for the past century, the same reasons for the drive for de-dollarization come up over and over, even by the admittance of U.S. officials and U.S. think tanks. When you read their like reports, it's very clear. They know exactly why the world is de-dollarizing. Number one, and first and foremost, this is at the top of the list, sanctions. Economic sanctions that prevent hard currency from flowing in, manipulate local markets, etc. This is the number one reason. The second one is a new one, and it is asset seizure. The most like outright, blatant example of this is the seizure by the United States and Western Europe of $300 billion worth of Russian assets in American and Western banks to be sent to Ukraine because the money was drying up from their domestic economies to send to Ukraine, so they're going to steal from Russia to do this. Now, think yourself. Let's say you are the head of Zimbabwe or Brazil or India or God knows what, Tanzania or whatever the fuck. And you realize that if you upset the United States government or you don't go along with their bullshit dictates, then they're gonna steal your the things that you've entrusted in their banks, the assets and money and whatever and capital that you entrusted in their bank. They're gonna steal it from you and then give it to your supposed regional enemies or whatever the fuck. If you see this activity, would you want to invest or put your assets in American banks or Western banks?
No,
Absolutely not. Absolutely not. Exactly right. And ever since this happened, the United Arab Emirates and Saudi Arabia and a bunch of other countries around the world have began de-investing but they've been moving assets outside of Western-controlled banking systems. Not as much as should be, but they have been doing it, which is very alarming. This is not the first time, by the way. They've done it to Iran, they've done it to Iraq, they've done it to the DPRK, they did it to Libya, something like $170 billion worth of assets. Libya is a country of like what at the time in the 80s, their population was like what 20 million or something, less probably. So imagine the ridiculous amounts of wealth that they seized. Illegally, by the way. So this asset seizure is another reason for it. And the third reason is one that's a bit more historic, and it's something called moving up the value chain. Moving up the value chain is economies speak for basically countries can stop producing cheap shit for Walmart in return for dollars to buy other stuff on the world market. Instead, they can actually focus on developing their own industrial growth, industrialize and produce more technically sophisticated goods, etc., and have a more equal relationship in trading, instead of just basically producing cheap shit for Walmart so that the United States consumer base buys it for dollars, and then this country that produces the cheap shit gets dollars so that they can then use said dollars to purchase things on the world market. In essence, this means less reliance on appeasing the American consumption base, the American market, which is a significant. This is a dependency question that goes back into like Nkrumah and even older. Even Lenin discussed a bit of this. Very interesting. Anyways, what are the ongoing processes of de-dollarization that are currently going on? De-dollarization is like a diesel engine that you try to start in cold weather, and the first like 2 or 3 times you tried, it didn't work, but now it's fucking roaring. And I use this example because de-dollarization initiatives were started by 2 countries, particularly in the most sacred of American cows, let's say, and that is the petrodollar, right? Both Libya and Iraq tried and failed miserably to the complete destruction and eradication of their social and political systems and whatnot, to supersede and replace the petrodollar with more equal international systems of accounting for trade in oil, which was a gold-backed like petrodollar that is not actually related to the dollar, but instead is based on like gold reserves or whatnot. The first example of this was the complete destruction of Iraq. It was one of the reasons, not the only reason, but one of the reasons for the invasion of Iraq. Iraq at that point had been stockpiling lots of gold in order to initiate the launching of a new currency. Libya had also done the same. And Libya was doing 2 things. They want to do, 1, a gold-backed petrodollar, and 2, they want to do a pan-African unit currency of trade, basically, to exclude the dollar as well. Both of these attempts were very brave, but failed because the United States simply didn't allow them and used military force to prevent them from getting off the ground. Now, moving on to the third time you twist the fucking key and now the diesel engine roars, that is the bilateral and regional trade agreements that have been happening with the BRICS countries. This means China, Russia, India, South Africa, and Brazil, of course, but specifically China, Russia, India. These are the biggest ones that are playing right now. They've signed trade agreements using their national currencies, which basically means trade without relying on the dollar. which is significant because, as you can imagine, trade between China, which is the largest population on Earth and also arguably the largest economy on Earth now, and India, with the largest population total and a very fastly growing economy, and Russia, which is a historic industrial power at this point, this is a significant development, them trading outside the dollar. To give you a concrete example of this, the dollar now accounts for 47% of globally allocated foreign exchange reserves. That means central banks have 47% of their currency reserves in dollars. This is down from over 70% in 2001. 70% is an overwhelming majority of assets, right? Now it's 47%. That's in 20 years, right?
The diesel engine has started.
Exactly right. Now here's where we get to the point where it's roaring. The neoliberal and the Wall Street favorite rag, Bloomberg, states, and I quote, "De-dollarization is happening at a stunning pace. The U.S. currency's share of global reserves decreased in 2022 at 10 times the average speed of the past 2 decades, as a number of countries looked for alternatives after Russia's invasion of Ukraine triggered sanctions." This is the first point that I want to note. At 10 times the speed, meaning in the past 20 years, it dipped from over 70% to 47%. That means over the next 20 years, this dip is going to be even more significant, most likely. To the point that there are like White House press briefings about how they're going to try to stop de-dollarization. And it was even a point on Trump's campaign trail. Both Trump and Harris, actually, but Trump was a bit heavier-handed on it, which is interesting because this is the first time it comes up during a presidential race. But moving aside from this, another interesting thing is, and this is mirroring this development, there will be over 1 billion new consumers added to the total global market from the global south over the next 10 years. Over 1 billion people would be added to this consumption base, compared to a gradually or more or less stagnant, going on reducing consumption base in the West. Now, increased consumption, generally, of course, means increased trade volume, right? Now, this increased trade volume would not be done in dollars, which would, of course, further weaken the total position of the dollar. This is a significant development. This is a exponential graph, like a logarithmic graph, and we're at the very bottom. We haven't seen it go up into the sky yet, but this is something that's going to really take off, most likely. But moving on, another way of skirting the dependence on the dollar isn't only by not using dollars, it's by also creating alternative institutions for lending that do not use dollars. Now, there's two big institutions for this. The first one is the New Development Bank, which is established by the BRICS to provide financing without reliance on the dollar, financing for international projects. That's the number one. And number two is the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank, which also promotes development, usually infrastructure-based, using alternative currencies. If you realize something very interesting, both the New Development Bank and the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank mostly focus on infrastructure development and industrialization. Why? Because that is where actual wealth is generated for countries. If you look at the general investment patterns of Western banks, what do they mostly invest in? They invest in financial tools. They invest in fucking moving numbers from here to there and speculating on assets, right? In the United States is a perfect example of this, speculating on real estate and whatnot without actually producing something. And that's why the quality of life is declining. The real wage in the United States is declining is because there's no actual production being made. There's no actual real investment being made for the most part. Anyways, moving on from that, another thing is diversification of bank reserves. This usually means either continuing stocking in central banks, like in China and Russia, stocking gold reserves, or reducing dollar-denominated assets for other currencies. Another thing that can happen, and this is something that I haven't read too much about, but it's many of the economists of the global south are very excited about this. And when Cuba and Venezuela and a bunch of these other countries are very excited about something, I tend to just kind of defer to their excitement because they know something I don't. And that is the development of central bank digital currencies to bypass dollar-denominated financial systems. This means blockchain-based systems for settling trade and whatnot. I'm not the best educated about this, so I can't really comment further, but it is something that both Cuba and Venezuela and Nicaragua were super, super, super into. Right? From the very beginning, going years back now. And I think this is, when you're in, quote-unquote, America's backyard, as disgusting as a phrase is, that is to say, it's much harder to skirt sanctions than when you share a border like Russia and China do, right? So as a result, these systems are completely outside the reach of the United States. Their use to settle trade and whatnot, I can imagine would be very, very useful
And that's why, ironically, like the biggest problem that Western governments and state banks have with the blockchain-based currencies, crypto in general, is they're not talking about money laundering by, I don't know, narco traffickers that they deal with, or by like it's just another tool for the extremely wealthy to get even wealthier. On those topics, they're like, crypto is super fucking based. But when it comes to countries that are being hyper exploited by them through sanctions, potentially using this now, let's call it open banking system. Obviously, that's a massive oversimplification. Then it's a massive problem, because you are immediately supporting terrorism. You are trading with countries that are militarily aligned against the U.S., which then brings a lot of like legal unnecessary weight to it, blah blah blah. And then that's the shit that they don't like about blockchain. But the other stuff they absolutely adore.
Absolutely, exactly right. Another point that they're getting into, the reason for the progress of de-dollarization is, like, as I mentioned before, active resistance to sanctions that are based in the dollar. Iran and Venezuela, for example, are heavily sanctioned by the US, and they've had to instead use like barter systems, oil for something else, whatever it may be, or non-dollar trade, like China and Russia have been doing. But the point of active resistance to sanction, you don't have to take my word for it. You can listen to a very high-up IMF official, who was, I believe, also the head of the IMF at one point, who said, and verbatim, he said, North America and Europe have seized hundreds of billions of dollars worth of assets from the reserves of Russia and Iran and Venezuela and Syria and Afghanistan and the DPRK. Many countries are now afraid they could be the next victims. After he listed like 7 fucking countries, he's like, many countries are afraid they could
completely unfounded fears.
Yeah, exactly right. So of course the next logical step is to speed up the process of this by sanctioning more countries. That's what the United States only does. It's expanding its sanctions list to 20, I believe, and if you count like tertiary and the non-specific quote unquote sanctions, it's even more than this. It's ridiculous. It's a ridiculous fucking system.
But that's the eternal like European cope of sorry if I interrupted you. That's the eternal European cope of like the European Union thinks that using the dollar, using the World Bank, using the IMF against enemy states is exclusively done to remind other enemy states of what can happen if they pursue, let's say, more independent governance. But why is it cope? Because, my dear European Union friends, it's also a reminder to you to stay the fuck in line as well. Because if you think they're not going to seize your assets or completely fucking crush your economies because even for 1 second you thought of not following the State Department line, I have a fucking bridge in San Francisco to sell you.
Exactly right. And that's kind of the point. It's mafia tactics, literally. Just to scare. It's ridiculous, but they're wearing respectable suits, right? They're even Armani. Oh boy. Anyways, let's talk about like concrete progress of de-dollarization. China and Russia are trading in their own currencies now. I think it's over 90% of their trade volume is in their individual currencies. China and Brazil have dropped dollar in bilateral trade between them as well. The United Arab Emirates are selling China gas and oil in yuan. For example, Southeast Asian nations in the ASEAN bloc are de-dollarizing their trade generally and have been very interested in speeding up this process. They've been promoting local payment systems. Kenya is buying West Asian oil with its own currency, for example. And all of these, each individual example I'm talking about, is billions of dollars worth of trade I'm mentioning. That's billions of dollars worth of trade that are not going in dollars. Think about that, right? That's fantastic. That's because the more you kind of peel away at this nonsense, the more constricted the United States gets in its ability to kind of control the system. I'm going to get onto the long-term consequences of that in a second, but let me just tell you about what the United States is, their attempts at stopping de-dollarization. What are they doing? First and foremost, sanctions and military pressure, the only thing that the United States knows. Trump even said as much. He's like, I will not allow countries to de-dollarize. I will slap 100% tariffs on their shit. I'm going to do X, Y, Z. And of course the implication is also eventually military. He's continuing the misunderstanding that if you put 100% tariffs, that means all the things that come into the United States will be more expensive for the American consuming base. Is he a fucking idiot?
Like Americans over here Googling what is a tariff?
A tariff is a fucking tax.
That's a meme.
Oh my
That's the
God.
meme. That's literally the meme.
Yeah.
Oh,
For the
God.
people who are not in the know, just to make life easier, a tariff is essentially a tax on goods coming into the United States from abroad, right? In an effort to prevent them from competing with local economy and local markets and local producers, the United States government puts a certain tax on that and then afterwards allows it into the market. So let's say there's a 20% tax on a fucking, I don't know, on a phone, let's say. When you go to buy that phone, it's the base price plus the 20% tax that you pay as a consumer. And that tax goes to the government to generate certain, well, in this case, it would be the 20% of tax that generates income to be sent to Israel to kill children, as well as send it into the never-ending hole that is the Ukrainian escapade, the Ukrainian adventure. And, of course, to give tax breaks to the wealthiest in society.
Car enthusiasts look into the chicken tax. There's a reason we got these giant monster truck pickups, and we don't have those beautiful little Chinese pickups. That's
exactly
stupid.
right. Yeah, the Chinese and Japanese one's exactly right. And electric cars are the newest one.
Yeah.
And guess what? The American consumers that have to pay this extra tax means that they pay more money for things that people in other countries pay less to get. Meaning that people in other countries have better consumption like options just generally. But also, if you happen to run a business and this is not like a yogurt that has a tariff on it, but instead like an industrial good that you need for production. Guess what? That means people in other countries producing the same shit as you do have now lower expenditures because they're getting the shit cheaper because they don't have to pay fucking tariffs from their governments on these inputs to their industrial production, meaning that you will be outcompeted on the world market, meaning that long term this is incredibly damaging to your, and that's exactly what the United States is doing. They slapped tariffs on over 900 industrial inputs from China, which is so fucking stupid, especially when you consider that Chinese industry is far less reliant on the United States market and US inputs than the inverse, and this process will only continue going to the future.
Another one last car related thing because I am compelled. The Ford CEO drives a Chinese car,
Exactly
and he says
right.
he doesn't want to stop driving it. It's like if a billionaire is going like, yeah, their shit's better than ours, I'm gonna pay the massive tariffs anyway so I can have this rip to you guys. That should tell you something.
Absolutely. Very, very interesting developments. We need to do a Chinese electric car episode special, and we need to get people some experts.
I used to do a car show. Let's fly to China, business expense, and do a car show on a Hyundai.
10,000%.
Yes, bro.
We
That'd be so fun.
We drive a BYD Seal or whatever the fuck.
Yo.
Just cruise and be like, oh. Sound off if you'd like to see that. We'll do a 3-episode special in the sound off. Anyways, okay. Moving on. The first thing I mentioned for the attempt at stopping the de-dollarization by the United States was the sanctioning and military pressure. The second thing that they're trying to do is financial and institutional leverage. How? The United States dominates the institutions of money lending and control generally on the international stage through the IMF and through the World Bank, which reinforces dollar-centric policies. This bites them in the ass because this directly drove the founding and development of these alternative banks that are now basically almost as big, if not as big, and soon will be much larger than the IMF and the World Bank. But they're just kind of doubling down on the system. They're doubling down on the same system that's causing all these alternatives to develop, instead of just being like, how about we be a little bit more fair? Regardless. Another thing is imposing restrictions on alternative financial systems. One example of this is pressuring SWIFT to exclude Russia. Now, this is a lot of bullshit that if you're not involved in this or read about this, you don't know what the fuck I just said. So I'll give an example. I'll give an explanation. SWIFT is basically the processing system for bank transactions. When country A sells to country B and you want to move money back and forth, the SWIFT system is what you use to move the money back and forth and to pay for goods and whatnot. That's basically what SWIFT does. Now, what happened after the 2022 war or invasion or special military operation, whatever you want to call it, between Russia and Ukraine, SWIFT was politically pressured because SWIFT is an organization. It was politically pressured by the EU and by the United States to exclude Russia from processing payments. This is an attempt to basically cripple a country's economy. And this was the big thing. They're like, oh, we're going to bring Russia to its knees. And this was the thing what they meant, right? Because if you were to do this to Belgium, for example, Belgium would crumble in 2 fucking days, right? Because they have no alternative. The thing is that Russia has been had started their own alternative in 2015. And I'm going to get to that in a second. The side note that I want to enter into is that SWIFT, after this political pressure, gladly excluded Russia, but they still categorically refuse to exclude Israel. How pleasant. How beautiful. We love the double standards. Just like the Olympics, just like FIFA and all these other football organizations, just like the fucking, what was it, the tennis organization?
The cat thing?
Yeah, exactly. Everything Russian is not allowed. All right, but the Israeli, no, they
My
can go
vodka.
Before you go.
Fucking beluga is now made in fucking Montenegro. What the fuck? The fuck?
You know, my favorite thing actually when we were in the undisclosed location where we met up. Our beautiful boy Yugopnik went to go and buy peruse the vodka section, and he was so disappointed. This man was so fucking heartbroken, right? You know the inverse. You know when the apocryphal tale of Yeltsin going to an American grocery store and being wowed by the selection of Totino fucking, what's it called?
Pizza rolls.
The pizza rolls, exactly right. The inverse of that is you go walking into this particular country's supermarket
falling
and
to his
seeing
knees.
just dog shit vodka.
How the turns have tabled, man. The turns have tabled.
Exactly right. Moving aside from that, actually a very nice side note on the refusing to exclude Israel, but a Israeli war criminal, soldier that was in the IDF, has done several tours.
It's redundant.
All that. He went to Cyprus recently to celebrate his 7th wedding anniversary on leave from committing genocide, and he was basically found and the Israeli intelligence system, instead of trying to quote unquote prevent attacks and protect its population, to prevent October 7th type attacks, of course, which they can't because they're impotent and the resistance never falters. Instead of trying to protect their own people, they're busy trying to find out, are our war criminals who go abroad as tourists being harassed in any way? And if they are, we need to send a plane to go pick them up and bring them back to Israel. And that's basically what happened to him. They're like, go immediately to the Israeli embassy in Cyprus because we don't believe that you're safe. Which is beautiful. This is how it's supposed to be. If you're a war criminal, you should not be allowed to fucking travel.
Yeah, no
or
peace.
if you do, exactly right. If you do, then I don't know. Arrest is as legal of a statement that I can, legally okay statement as I can make. Anyway,
Stay up on Spotify, yeah.
Yeah. But now, as opposed to just having Swift, there's been several alternative systems that have been developed. The first of which was there's an Indian system that's been going on for a while, but the Russian system for transfer of financial messages, and the Chinese cross-border interbank payment system. So it's SIPS and Citfm or whatever the fuck. Not as nice as Swift, sadly.
Yeah.
The Russians
but regardless,
suck so
there are
hard with that shit, man. God, if like
Yeah.
Middle Eastern and African countries suck with naming their fucking revolutionary guards and their fucking resistance movements, the Russians
Exactly right.
Yeah.
No, it's gonna sound like a 1921 Bureau of like tire production, Soviet Union. But yeah. Anyways, so that's a very good thing that there are now these alternative methods. Of course, geopolitical intervention, that's what the United States does. I gave the example of Iraq and Libya. They're 20 years too early, sadly. Otherwise, they would still be sovereign nations today and would have contributed plenty to multipolarity. Sadly, they couldn't. And the final point of this is the imposing, the United States, what it tries to do is impose economic ties beneficial to it. So what it does is it imposes trade relations favorable to the United States via dollar dominance or dollar domination on emerging markets, basically attempting to tether them closer to dollar-based financial systems. That's what NAFTA was. When the United States tried to create like free trade agreements with Mexico, they would tie the peso to the dollar, but the peso was way lower in value, right? So basically, as a result of this, the net transfer of value from Mexico to the United States increased ever further. And this is what the United States tries to do. So what it did to Argentina too, with this crazy dude Milei coming in. What are the long-term consequences of de-dollarization for the United States specifically? The number one, and this is a funny point, the erosion of its global hegemony. That's the point of it. As the dollar's dominance declines, the U.S. loses its ability to project economic power globally. But funnily enough, and ironically, this is listed as a positive in a few think tank documents, and the way they frame it is reducing global resentment of the United States, which is so fucking telling.
But also, like, if you are genuine, if you genuinely believe that the market, if it operates without obstruction and so-called monopolies, we know how ironic this is, but whatever. Yeah. If you genuinely believe in this, you should be for de-dollarization, so that every player in the world plays the same game, because currently they are, as Hakeem absolutely brilliant, and by the way, this is one of your best works ever, put forward, the game is not fair right now. Not even fucking close. So if you really believe in the beautiful market, they will spawn an incredible utopia if everybody actually competed. Then you don't get to have just one currency dominating over everything. You know, Americans, if you're so good, if you're so entrepreneurial, I don't know other words that fucking lib capitalists use to define somebody that's very good and contributes.
Free market. If you truly believe in free markets,
then do it. Let's go, baby. Let's go. But obviously the counter argument going to be like, oh, but we have human rights here. They don't have human rights over there, so we can't really compete with them because they're going to hyper exploit. Brutal cope.
My God. And also, what's it called? A little addendum to this point. I mean, I have a video coming out about this exact topic, actually, the how nonsense competition is. And the reason is because countries, these industrialized Western countries early on in the colonial eras, they could very easily penetrate into way underdeveloped markets and completely take them over and completely fill them with their own products, etc., and benefit. But when the inverse happens and they start being outcompeted, then all of a sudden, protectionism, we want to protect it. Exactly right. It's rules for thee, not for me, right? It's ideological justification for the unfairness of the system, and then it crumbles once they're at the wrong end of it. But we'll get there when we get there. The second point that I want to talk about when it comes to the consequences of de-dollarization, the long-term ones at least, is increased domestic financial pressure on the United States. The United States Treasury market, in this case, would face reduced demand. What does that mean? That means that generally the lending or the borrowing costs would be higher. Now, let's say you are a random American who wants to get a credit card, or who wants to get a loan for a business, or wants to get a loan for a house, or whatever the fuck, right? Having higher borrowing costs means higher interest rates. Both are tied together. This means reduced total spending. If you can't reach the bare minimum to be able to get the loan, or if your credit's too bad, or you just don't have the ability to do that, to get the loan, you don't qualify for it because the cost is very high and interest rates are too high for you to be able to pay back on it, then that means that you're going to have reduced total spending, just generally consumption-based spending and borrowing. Now, what happens in capitalist economies when total spending, both in borrowing and on commodities, reduces? Recession. It's a fucking recession.
Super happy, and they tell you that actually you should pay for all of it, and they say we're definitely not using austerity, and then they admit that it's a recession.
Yeah, exactly right. Yeah, exactly right. Beautifully said. Yeah, they're gonna make it all flowery, of course. But what happens is a recession, right? A recession, baby, is the more important way of saying it. Now, dollar dominance specifically helps the American consumer base, American consumers, because it lowers the price of imported goods generally. Because again, value transference. This usually, the estimation is a total saving per year of between $25 to $45 billion for the American consumer. 25 to $45 billion a year are saved by American consumers because of dollar dominance. The less the domination of the dollar exists, or like the less supreme it is, the more the American consumer will have to spend. Which means that the already very tight belt of the average American will get even tighter, enough to fucking split them in two.
Rip.
This on top of the potential for causing a recession would cause significant difficulties for the average American, which is a kind of like if I want to be a Maoist third worldist about this, I would say conditions will worsen. But also, as Lenin said, the worse things get, the better generally when it comes to these things, because this will at least kind of help the process of awakening of the American people in this. And that's why, again, like, you join your organizations, please do the reading, right? You're all waiting for a fucking opportunity. When the opportunity comes, you shouldn't be caught with your fucking dick in your hands. without the theoretical basis, without the necessary organizations, without the dual power structures, so on and so forth. But this is a point we've hampered on plenty. The final thing, and the final long-term consequence of de-dollarization is the general geopolitical realignment. We are seeing a moment of multipolarity in the global economy, which undermines the U.S. in leadership in quote-unquote international institutions, on the world stage, in political and diplomatic things. Already the United States is kind of being sidelined internationally through even in the UN and stuff. Nobody's respecting their decisions. They only have to follow along with it because of the overwhelming pressure and power of the United States. But this is different from 40 years ago, when there were many countries around the world that generally did believe in the United States' bullshit, right? Whether it be in Southeast Asia or Latin America, depending on where you are. Anyways, the weakening of the core's grip over the imperial periphery generally will develop even further as the financial underpinnings of U.S. imperialism deteriorates, which is sigma developments generally. That's how they should be framed. And finally, what are the positives for the world economy, or particularly the global south? What are the positive developments of this? Number one, a development of real economic sovereignty. Reduced reliance on the dollar means nations in the global south can adopt monetary policies that actually suit their needs, that can allow them to focus on industrialization, not just creating cheap garbage, to be able to get hard currency. It frees them from constraints of debt, dominated debt, for example, allows them to pay back debts in their own currencies, which is a huge fucking thing, because the more in debt you are, the more the IMF forces the depreciation of your currency. The more depreciated your currency is, the weaker it is in exchange against the dollar, especially when you trade in commodities, which means it becomes even harder for you to repay your interest on your debts, let alone your complete debts.
And then
right?
you're a slave.
Basically, and that's by design. That is the debt trap, which they pretend that China does, except China does nothing of that fucking sort. But anyways, it allows them to suit the demands of their economies better, meaning, and not to the demands of the American market or the rules and sanctions that the United States and its vassals impose on all these countries. Number one. Number two is generally more diversified financial systems. This is like a technical point, but it's incredibly important. The creation of these multipolar monetary systems that I mentioned, the Russian, Chinese, and Indian, and so on and so forth, reduces general risks with the volatility of one single currency. And this is best illustrated. This technical point is best illustrated with a paraphrasing of Grenada's heroic revolutionary Maurice Bishop, who died tragically at the hand of a U.S. Military intervention and coup. Of his democratically elected and developed revolutionary government. He said, when the United States economy gets a cold, we get pneumonia. And that's kind of the point here. When you're so tied to the United States dollar, if, for example, a bank closes in the United States, then all of a sudden you're fucking in Montenegro, for whatever the fuck reason, you're losing your house. Why the fuck, right? And this is one of those. It's a bit more complicated than this, but this diversified financial system is incredibly important. Another point is de-dollarization weakens the mechanisms through which surplus value is extracted from the global south. For example, as mentioned, dollar-pegged debt, trade imbalances, there's more options to relieve said debt, to balance trade, so on and so forth. And finally, this increases the cooperation between the global south to the global south, right? Nations of the global south increase their general trading volume directly with one another in their own currencies, which allows for regional solidarity and development to occur. If you have very interconnected economies which are hyper-reliant or benefit greatly from trade between themselves, then that greatly reduces the risks of war and other frictions, because it means that, if we go into this, we're really gonna be hurting our own interests, right? And that's kind of the point of China's win-win diplomacy drive generally. If you were to create all these economic relations with each other, then everything else kind of falls by the wayside, because you guys working with each other directly develops and improves the quality of life of both parties, right? Ethiopia has been seeing, for example, IMF imposed bullshit for decades, right? And no good has come of it. And only when the Chinese came in have we now finally seen, for example, electric intercity transport, like trams and trains and whatnot. Or, for example, the new port that opened up in Peru, that the Chinese built for $3-something billion, which cuts trade time by by 2/3 or something, opening up all of Latin America's massive consumer base to Chinese goods. This is a huge development, and the United States is very fucking pissed about this. So they're so pissed about it, actually, that they had a very quickly scrambled together press conference with the demon Blinken, and he got up on a podium. He's like, "Oh, we are gonna support the economic development. This is a gift from the American people to the Peruvian people," where they sent a bunch of old California trains or something, like rusted fucking trains, to Peru. Yes. And the way that they framed it is that they're sending it as if it's out of the goodness of their own will. But no, California is selling it. At basically regular price to Peru, despite the fact that they've been used for like 20-30 years, and they're
Looney
run down.
Tunes ass push carts.
Yeah, exactly right. It's fucking ridiculous. the general TLDR of all this is these are incredibly base developments, but it's still very early. Just because multipolarity has begun, it's still a snowball. It hasn't become the full avalanche, let's say. But that day is coming. And contending with the American reaction to this, which will be violent and thrashing and catastrophic for the world in one way or another, that will be like the next following step to deal with after the institution and development of multipolarity.
Way to finish off on a fucking high note.
My baby.
We all gonna die! Okay, no,
I mean,
not, of course. I mean,
Jeez.
socialism or barbarism. It's like, oh, the contradictions are sharpening. It's gonna be socialism. It's gonna be fucking barbarism.
Give the piggies some hope. Let the piggies have their hope.
I'm gonna barbarize! Oh, don't barbarize!
Exactly
Do not
right.
barbarize. If you have money, donate to our Patreon, and everything that is left, build a bunker, okay? Build a bunker now.
You directly support multipolarity by by investing in the Deprogram. Look, I promise you, we'll form ourselves into an LLC, and then we will list ourselves in the Chinese what's it called? Fucking. The pling pling plung plung. I can't fucking speak.
The stock exchange.
The stock exchange.
Yeah, you will be able to buy in at a very low cost. Because
Exactly.
you have previously been patrons, which will be redefined
Get in at the
as
ground
original
floor.
investors.
Exactly right.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Before we oh my god, we will be the official spokespeople of the Chinese Communist Party. I hope you understand. So
Absolutely. Well, thank you, boys, for those beautiful rundowns. Dear viewers, if you have forgotten, this is an episode about liberalism in general. So I'm going to move away from de-dollarization and talk about the stuff that you're probably a bit more familiar with day to day. We're going to talk about the inherent instability of the kind of feel-good liberalism of the 21st century. So when you think of Western talking points, when they're trying to sell their regime, particularly talking points from the United States, what comes to mind? Usually it's like the importance of human rights, the sanctity of self-determination and democratic principles. Borgir, of course, yes.
Exactly.
Individual freedom, economic opportunity, equality, respect for the environment, depending, rule of law, stuff like that. And now that's all well and good, but there is a problem. There's this inherent contradiction between holding these values and also, on the other hand, being firmly committed to the continuation of capitalism. How so? Well, you just look at what capitalism requires, right? Endless accumulation and ever greater profits. That's the only way the system works. How does capitalism achieve these things? By sacrificing those lofty ideals that liberals claim to hold. When capital is threatened,
No Borgir.
the liberal ruling class, more Borgir, yes.
No Borgir.
I'm just going to agree with you every time. Yeah.
I love you.
When capital is threatened, the liberal ruling class always, 100% of the time, sides with capital, even when those supposed principles are for the other side. So when kids show up at government offices to demand an end to fossil fuel use, they're ridiculed, they're kicked out, so Biden can approve new oil drilling plans. When journalists expose the truth about the criminality of the military-industrial complex, they'll hunt those journalists to the ends of the earth. When banks take advantage of people with predatory lending and eventually implode, the government is there to bail not average people out, right? Not the people whose lives were ruined, but the banks and their rich executives. When democratic liberation movements crop up anywhere in the world, literally anywhere, and threaten to cut into Western profits, even a little bit, the U.S. launches coups, color revolutions, or just straight up assassinates the leadership to maintain their economic stranglehold. And now, most visibly what's going on now, when hundreds of thousands of people rally against genocide, Joe Biden and his Western European counterparts double down on funding the extermination campaign.
Exactly
In
right.
every single instance where labor or the left or just average people are opposed to capital, the liberal ruling class shrugs and they stop pretending to give a shit about silly things like human rights or democracy. They will always do whatever they have to ensure the survival of the economic system that they benefit from. Not terribly difficult to understand, right? It's not necessarily because they're evil, though there are plenty of ghouls in the halls of power, both government and corporate, but it's because that's what the profit motive demands. This is the behavior that is required. And when people get wise to this and say, hey, hold on a sec, I thought we cared about upward mobility for the little guy. I thought we cared about the environment. when things start to heat up a little bit, the government mouthpieces trot out the same lines they always do. Oh, this is the beauty of democracy. People are divided on the path the country should take. In a beautiful system like ours, big changes take time while we work things out together, right? This incrementalism is the name of the game for them. Now, every once in a while, the working class might get a crumb tossed their way. Maybe a law that forces companies to let you opt out of data collection. That's a recent thing. Or maybe a bump in your state's minimum wage. Just enough to release a little bit of the pressure that's building up among the unwashed masses. And
after 30 years of agitation, just so that it's literally like the same amount in real wage afterwards.
Yeah, they just bring you up to where it should have been X amount of years ago. And again, like, we're seeing fewer and fewer concessions because why? We don't have an alternative in like the Soviet Union knocking on Europe's door saying, hey, why do they consume more calories per capita? Why do they consume more artistic shows and theater and stuff per capita? So now without that possibility of a better life, they're just like, we'll just twist this valve a little bit every 20 years and adjust the minimum wage to, 50% of inflation. People are like, yeah, we did it. We won. You didn't win. It's important to note that these concessions, by the way, they're never going to truly threaten capital, and they can be taken away at any time because we don't really have organized labor. These things are just a distraction, right? It's a release valve operated by people with net worths in the millions and billions. These people can never do anything that would undermine the primacy of capital, or they lose. And when it comes to existential crises like climate change, that is exactly what's called for. We need stuff where capital isn't the main driver to deal with a problem of that magnitude. So under capitalism, we pretty quickly find...
Yeah.
Right. Yeah, it doesn't work like that. There's no moral judgment to be made there. It's just the way the system works. Like, you can't do both. So we find this irreconcilable problem when it comes to the relationship between capital and the rights of the many, whether that's democratic rights, whether that's solving massive problems like climate change. They butt heads. It just doesn't work. So when we get to the point where the average person realizes that liberalism offers nothing but empty gestures, renaming streets and wearing African clothes instead of fixing over-policing or the for-profit carceral system, like we saw with in the aftermath of the BLM protests, or saying they respect women's rights, but they enable a genocide where women and children are the main victims, where women are having to have C-sections without anesthesia, where hygiene products are impossible to get, and it's when they say they care about the environment, but each successive president approves more oil and fracking projects. When all of this stuff becomes clear to the people living under this system, then liberalism faces a crisis. And where does it turn when capital is threatened with wolves at the door? Every time it turns to fascism. Every single time. Like, open a history book, every single time. Liberalism will always collapse because it cannot handle this core contradiction between these lofty ideals and the nature of capitalism. And when it collapses, because socialism threatens capital and fascism does not, the liberals will run crying into the arms of people who will attempt to sell the population on myths of white replacement, of hordes of immigrants coming to steal their jobs and their daughters, of the enemy over there threatening your freedom. So we need to go exterminate them, or of the enemy within that we need to purge to get back to a mythical golden age of capitalism. And while this is happening, the old liberal regime, those not already absorbed into the fully fascist one, they'll just stand in the corner like a cuck waiting for the fascists to give back the keys to power after the crisis has passed. And that's not how it works. Like, if you open a history book, again, doesn't usually turn out that way. So it's... This is the stuff we need to keep in mind. It's a multifaceted thing, as each of my esteemed colleagues have elucidated for you. But this is the bit that you're probably the most aware of. So look for it, right? You'll see as these crises, as these contradictions sharpen, you're going to see more and more of this, where people are beginning to realize, oh, this system doesn't work for me. It doesn't work for me personally, the guy who voted for Trump. Why is my life getting worse? So this is... That's it. That's all there is to it. Again, I've mentioned this last couple episodes, but I've never in my life have I seen people after an election so somber on both sides. It's very interesting to see. And I think some of the statistics that Hakeem shared with us. I think some of the stuff that you got, Nick, elucidated at the beginning of the show really goes a long way towards explaining why that's happening.
That's why this episode, I believe, would be very, very good to potentially send to some of your friends that might be confused on why does everything feel not even necessarily wrong, just like you're constantly being lied to.
Changed.
And at this point, it's like so in your face that you can't even just cope it away or call it out for, just, politicians being politicians. Hypocrisy always dominates everything. It's no longer like that thing over there that you're pointing to. It's now in your homes. It's in your workplaces. It's in your families. It's interacting with your children. And don't even get me started on what it's doing, again, from the Western perspective abroad. So I think it would be a very decent one to send. I don't know, clip out the intro where we do skull measuring. For some of your more reactionary friends. Oh man, these guys are very based, bro. Look.
With all that being said, today we've had a very thorough conversation. Some of it superficial, some of it deep. Hopefully all of it entertaining and informative. Again, I would like to say that without you guys, our Patreon supporters, we'd not be able to do any of this. So thank you from the bottom of our hearts for all your support, all your kind words, and all your fun little art and gestures.
The
and all
art
that you send us.
Beautiful.
Gorgeous, and really makes our days, genuinely. We would especially like to thank our Habibi tiers, but thanks to everybody else, of course. If you are interested in joining the Patreon, then click the link in the description. Patreon.com/Deprogram, I believe, right? Yes?
Yeah, you got it this time, baby. Well done. We've trained him.
Just took 2
He
years.
can learn.
Yeah, 2 years of doing this. Thank you. Good job.
Thank you. I'm bowing. Yes, exactly. And you get extra episodes, bonus episodes. You get extra content of other forms. You
Everything
get access
very
to
early.
Exactly right. Early episodes. I always forget early episodes.
It's the
1 week
biggest
early.
fucking seller. Every time I'm sitting here, I'm fucking shaking.
sorry,
No,
You're our ad guy. I don't know. I don't even know why the fuck I'm doing it. But anyways, the access to the Discord server with fantastic people on the Discord server, as well as the Habibi chats, in which you can talk with us for once monthly, lovely discussions and questions and whatnot. With all that being said, this has been the Deprogram. I'm Hakeem.
I'm JT.
I'm Ugopnik.
It's gonna be fucking socialism. Let's go.
No, I root for the barbarism.